I've talked about it ad nauseum at this point, but Capcom's approach to bringing the formerly beleaguered Resident Evil franchise back to prominence has been one of the most pleasant surprises in the past half-decade of gaming, and has seemingly sparked a renaissance of high-profile horror games, a segment that was all but dead not too long ago. The now concluded Ethan Winters saga was exactly what the series needed. In many regards, a push into new, unknown territories with the first-person perspective and location choices, but a return to form with their level design and atmosphere. Retrospectively, coming out with 7 first instead of a remake was a bold signal of intent. It's a tall order to reboot your franchise with a game that, on the surface, bears no resemblance to what came before, yet simultaneously promises to rekindle the glory days. I think they not only achieved that, but unintentionally filled the void left in a gaming industry sorely missing more traditional story-driven FPS campaigns in the style of Half-Life or BioShock. Remakes were inevitable though, and not a bad idea considering how obtuse the PS1 era titles are to those who weren't exposed to them in their time period. Things got off to a fantastic start in 2019 with the RE2 remake. Admittedly, I've never played the original, but I have played plenty of games from this era like the original Silent Hill, and the ways in which they were able to modernize and make the design more accessible without compromising on the core attributes that made the games of that generation special was nothing short of masterful. Unfortunately, the remake of RE3 didn't fare as well, and stands out as the sole stain on this current era of the franchise. Even without playing the original, it is painfully obvious that it suffers from a lack of content, and it does not share the subtlety and attention to detail that all the other games have. With that remake in the history books, for the last few years all attention turned to the inevitable remake of Capcom's favorite game to re-release, Resident Evil 4. I'll just say it now, I love RE4, and like a lot of other people around my age, it was my introduction to the series. My most recent full playthrough of it was 2 years ago, right before Village came out, and that remains one of the most fun gaming experiences I've had in recent memory. At the same time, it's ironic and somewhat tragic that it has become the series' most recognizable title. This is the game that shifted priority toward action and away from horror, and I think it's indisputable that its success led the franchise down the path that necessitated a series reboot. So while the argument for this being a super safe, predictable, and perhaps redundant remake is obvious, I feel you could also argue for it being the most risky move Capcom has taken with the franchise since 2017, given how much work they've had to put in to claw back RE's survival horror credibility. Despite all of that baggage, I was excited to get my hands on this remake of one of the best and most influential games of all time. And now that I've played it, I'm ready to tell you all about my return trip to Spain.
Over here, stranger.
RE4 is not only an at times goofy game in the context of its series, but it also embraces a lot of, for lack of a better term, video gamey hijinks that are characteristic of its generation. They weren't quite at Boulder Punch levels yet, but this is the game that made that moment possible. That, along with its tendency to put traditional horror characteristics in the back seat, put it at odds with the more grounded, serious, and horror-centric tone established in the RE Engine titles. Taming its more zany moments and presenting its story and world in a way that meshes with the more recent games while still keeping its identity intact is easily the biggest challenge this remake had to tackle. From the second you take control of Leon, the direction taken is crystal clear. The basic structure of RE4 is not fundamentally changed, but what lies on the surface is up for grabs. It's darker, it's much more serious, and I was able to get invested in what it was trying to do beyond pure gameplay. Some sections that were previously shooting corridors are now tense, flashlight-lit encounters that strongly evoke moments from RE2 Remake. And the few horror moments that did exist in the original, like the Chainsaw Man and Regenerators, the latter of which I won't spoil here, have been taken to new heights. In addition to providing the game with horror credibility that the original mostly lacked, it also goes a long way in providing variety in a game that was previously far more homogeneous in tone. Because, thankfully, they didn't take the all-too-common modernist route of treating the old thing like a problem that needed to be fixed. Despite its brooding ambiance, it still retains over-the-top, at times outright silly moments, and they're actually even more insane this time around. This is a laudably dynamic game, and it's all the better for it.
Then come, Sancho Panza! Let us rescue the Princess Dulcinea!
You're gonna hurt yourself.
If you ask me, the story, specifically the way it is presented, is easily the most lackluster element of the original. Now, I never really found it to be to the game's detriment, but it mostly serves as an excuse for the levels to play out, and comes off as an afterthought. The way it unfolds never quite made sense to me, the characters, while at times funny, are often stilted, and motivations and lore are a bit hazy. Nothing has been drastically rewritten here, but they cleaned up this narrative so much and present it with total clarity. Awkward moments like the infamous intro sequence where Leon speaks English to a rural Spaniard have been addressed. He now at least attempts to speak some Spanish, but I think the most impactful improvements come from the changes in the characters, with their interactions and dialogue. I had some reservations going in because while 7 and 8 have fantastic voice acting, 2 Remake had some notably stiff performances that stood out like a sore thumb given its otherwise extremely high production value. Luckily, that seems to be pretty much sorted here. Leon specifically was very rough in RE2, and despite having the same voice actor here, it's a totally serviceable performance. I think some of the stiffness is still there, but whether intentional or not, it does serve to further link this game to the original in a kind of subliminal way.
Hola, Luis here. You guys still around?
Well, I wanted to go home, but Ashley just had to see this castle first.
He's still fun and sarcastic, but in a much less distracting way, and he's now also able to get serious, specifically when interacting with the other characters, which was not the case before. Meanwhile, many of the supporting characters are exponentially improved over their 2005 counterparts. Previously, Ashley could come off obnoxious at times, and overall had little to say despite being the centerpiece of the story. This new Ashley behaves more like someone in her position would, even making witty and realistic comments in quieter gameplay moments.
Leon, what are you doing? Leon, are you kidding me? Jumping across chandeliers, seriously, who does that?
She's the first companion character they've done in this new generation of RE, and she has the most screen time of any non-protagonist thus far. They did a great job of making her likable, giving her an almost calming aura where you don't want to see any harm become of her, and I like the way she and her relationship with Leon subtly evolves as the game progresses and the stakes rise higher.
Ashley. Ashley Graham, are you in here?
みなさん、おはろー、エアレニャンです。皆さん、お元気ですか?
With Luis, I feel like after all these years, I finally understand what his character is supposed to be instead of him just conveniently being there. He's probably not getting all that much more screen time here, but it feels like he is, because he's written in a more meaningful way with a tweaked backstory and dialogue that elucidates crucial plot points. Krauser works so well here too. He does the crazy wolf thing like Rutger Hauer at the end of Blade Runner, and his past with Leon is expounded upon just that little bit more, both with lore logs and dialogue, to make his inclusion a more natural unfolding of the plot and less of a random late-game encounter. Again, there are no radical changes here, they've just polished and built upon what was already there, but it's so much more believable and adds up to make a story that I previously all but ignored enjoyable, and it's hard to ask for more than that. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the original RE4 was a landmark for its genre, third-person action shooters, tantamount to games like Halo CE, COD 4, or even Mario 64, and its influence is still directly visible in games as recent as The Last of Us 2. Even for someone that was a single-digit age at the time it came out, it was blatantly obvious that nothing like it had ever been done before, and that's what made it such a phenomenon in its time. The over-the-shoulder camera perspective was the biggest revelation and continues to dominate the industry. However, it's not just something to look back on as an influential turning point. It's an enjoyable game to this day and still has its own flavor to offer, even after 18 years of games that have built upon its formula. The tankish controls admittedly require a mental calibration to get acclimated to now, but there's something about that point-and-shoot combat with the laser that still hits. It's tight, super tactical, with this almost stiff, but in a good way, segmentation between all your actions, and after all this time, something about it always has me yearning for more. All this is to say that unlike RE2 and 3 where the gameplay is so distant and dated, RE4's is still a highlight and is much closer to modern games than it is not. My fear was that it would leave less room for reinterpretation, with some of its unique attributes inevitably being lost in the process of modernization. On the surface, especially to those who never played the original, this remake might appear to be glossy third-person shooter number 564, but it's not. The design adheres to more old-school sensibilities, and the gameplay is among the best, if not the best, modern shooter gameplay I've experienced, providing far more depth than its AAA contemporaries. Its basic format is very similar to the RE2 and 3 remakes. It's not stop and shoot, but you can't hipfire and aiming slows you down to a crawl. That's where the similarities end though, as in hand, the combat system is far more substantial than either of those, both in mechanics and feel. The controls have a newfound weightiness and confidence to them, while the gunplay is beefy and heavy, yet extremely precise and responsive. I've never played anything that feels quite like this. It's part OG RE4, part contemporary game, and part something entirely new. Every combat scenario is this intense tactical puzzle that's a joy to play and just refuses to get old. It's visceral, tactile, and satisfying, all the good adjectives, with solid audio and almost addictive animation work. I even enjoyed reloading all my guns at the end of each fight. This is what a good shooter should play like, and ironically, a lot of it has to do with its inclusion of features that are lost arts in 2023, like smart AI and freedom of gameplay choice. Enemy reactiveness to damage, a key innovation of the original, is not only here but enhanced. This is a commendably gory game. Bodies collide and pile up, and different surfaces and enemy types convey different feedback when shot. The Ganados have a more savage look and attitude, with seemingly easy fights getting out of control as you're swarmed, while the Zealots unsettlingly creep their way towards you with more deadly weapons and wooden shields, which are satisfying as ever to blast with a shotgun. All the classic guns and their upgrade paths return, though the handling characteristics and special attributes like the Punisher's overpenetration felt more obvious here than before. There are some new additions like the MP5 and M4, as well as the bolt thrower, which I wasn't a big fan of, to be honest. There's more hits than misses here though, and it's all more than you could ever use in a single playthrough, making multiple playthroughs a more compelling proposition.
A choice of an avid gun collector. It's a nice gun, stranger.
This remake also adds entirely new mechanics that go beyond what you would normally hear me describe as gameplay flourishes. The knife has been transformed from a utility tool and early game ammo saver into its own weapon that plays a crucial role in every fight. It now has durability and an upgrade path, and can be used to finish off downed enemies, quickly break out of grabs, and, the big game changer, can parry light melee and ranged attacks. That last one is such a simple change, but it's brilliant. It feels amazing to pull off, and goes a long way in diversifying the combat loop. The final and perhaps most surprising addition is that of a crouch button, allowing for some light stealth gameplay. Rather than being a fundamental concept that levels are based around, its purpose is to give you a free kill or two before a big encounter. Outside of a brief tutorial section, its use is never mandatory. Aside from stealth and traversal, the crouch button is also used as a dodge mechanic for heavy attacks, which, alongside the knife parries, seems to pay homage to the QTEs of the original. There are so many actions to juggle here between shooting different limbs, parrying, dodging, melee hits, knife finishers, and even reloading, and it all flows together so seamlessly, almost like comboing in a fighting game, while still forcing you to think about and commit to your actions like the original, something I was certain would get lost in translation. This is a game that gives you a lot of tools, and while it never forces you to play a certain way, you really do need to eke out every last ounce of utility against these, at times, genuinely challenging enemies and encounters that have been balanced against the more empowering combat mechanics.
What's going on?
Well, at least we don't have to worry about being followed. Come on.
When it comes to level design, the first 15 minutes alone demonstrate that this is not a simple visual refresh of the original. The previously sparse intro section with the cabin has been significantly bulked up, but the iconic village right after appears to be geometrically one-to-one. Then after that, the farm area has been reworked while still retaining recognizable elements, but introducing an all-new enemy type. Some things are pretty drastically changed, some things are brand new, while some areas and even very obscure specific details have been preserved. Almost every big moment and memorable location is still making an appearance here, but many of those moments snuck up on me, and some of those areas have been so visually updated that it took me minutes before I realized that I knew where I was. It's like having a dream, or someone came into your house and moved things around. Disorienting, but in the best way possible. The ethos of these levels and their design has also been overhauled and brought more in line with that of the RE Engine games. Each of the 3 acts, the village, the castle, and the island, are now their own interconnected level that can be backtracked through, with plenty of shortcuts and what felt like twice as many puzzles. It does a lot to alleviate the corridor shooter hyper-linear feel that 2005 had at times, especially deeper into the game. Some areas even open up and require exploration, like the lake area, which is now fully traversable, but wisely never go too wide as to break the pacing of this still action-centric game. It's closer to a From Software game than it is to the super intricate puzzle box design of, say, RE7, but what AAA action shooter bothers to do level design like this? Not many. There's even some side content here, though I would say the way it was described leading up to release was a bit generous. Rather than side quests, I would describe the majority of these as errands, though there were 2 optional bosses I encountered. Basically, they've expanded upon the Blue Medallion concept, and upon completion of these tasks, the merchant, who is still every bit as charming, will reward spinels, which now function like a second currency.
We like our herbs, we do. Heal a man, kill a man, they do it all.
The levels themselves are amazing to play through. The castle remains the highlight of the game and feels notably elevated here, with tons of nooks and crannies to check out, and of course, it looks as amazing as you'd expect, given how immaculate Village's rendering of similar scenes was. The natural glow of torches and candles convincingly illuminates the geometrically dense and well-textured rough stonework of the more stark areas, while the more opulent rooms have an almost braggadocious amount of detail and material work on display, with marble, granite, carpeting, gold leaf, and wood adorning them in a stunning manner. Perhaps more impressive, though, is how well this game handles its outdoor sections, which was a weak point in Village both in terms of gameplay and visuals. Given how much of RE4 takes place outdoors, it's a good thing that that's been rectified here, with the village and island's outdoor segments playing every bit as well as the indoor ones and looking great while doing it. This is the furthest the RE engine has been pushed yet in every regard, and it was more than up to the task. The character models somehow continue to get better, benefiting from a new strand-based hair system this time around, while the environments are so varied with different times of day and tons of challenging lighting scenarios, yet consistently looking of the same high quality. Despite the PS4 version, this is decidedly a next-gen game, and the RE engine continues to be proof that in-house engines can provide a look and level of performance that the ever-growing sea of Unreal Engine titles cannot. They also pushed this game in terms of size. I have consistently noted that these new RE games are quite short in length, with all of them clocking in under 10 hours. OG RE4 is a very long game for what it is, and that length is crucial to its identity. In light of what happened with the RE3 remake, my biggest concern before playing this was cut content, and there are a handful of things that are missing. The gondola, the statue chase, and the U3 boss fight to name a few. I'm not missing them though, because for each minor cut, something else was added or expanded. I'm happy to report that it took me around 13 hours to beat this, putting it on par with the original and making it the longest RE Engine title by a wide margin. It's also a tightly paced game. Despite its length, no moment or concept overstays its welcome. There is so much meat on the bones of this game to dig into, and it makes for the most fully realized RE Engine game to date.
Such a fool, Mr. Kennedy. To have been bestowed with Lord Sattler's...
You talk too much.
It failed!
You vulgar,
Utterly uncivilized! Mongrel!
I could talk about so much more here. How the section where you play as Ashley has been all but entirely changed into something far better. How the El Gigante fight on the castle wall brilliantly combines the classic RE puzzle under pressure with an action-packed boss fight. But what it all comes down to is a core design philosophy of putting gameplay first at all times. It plays like a gameplay-centric arcade-style game, yet has the presentation of AAA cinematic games, and that's a pairing seldom seen. While I don't hate games like God of War Ragnarok or Horizon Forbidden West, playing this makes me realize how on-rails and restrictive modern action titles can be, artificially slowing the player down to some predefined pace. Even with all its fancy graphics and more cutscenes than the last 3 games put together, RE4 Remake has not one single moment that does that, and that's really the magic of it. There isn't anything here that's all that innovative per se. Instead, much like how RE7, 2 Remake, and Village brought back the PS1-era survival horror design in a modern format, this returns to a form of game making that just kind of stopped after a certain point in the late 2000s. Once I got to the absolutely unhinged minecart section, I felt like the critic at the end of Ratatouille. I couldn't believe how much fun I was having. Classic fun. The kind of fun that makes you wonder where that fun has been all this time. I think they could have milked more length out of this game, but that's just me wanting more for the sake of more. Realistically, I only have one genuine complaint about this game. One thing I would change if I could, and it's the removal of laser aiming. Sure, one hand cannon comes with it, and 2 of the pistols can have it as an attachment, but I wish it was on all the weapons. It makes sense for this gameplay, and cleverly turns a HUD element into an in-world one. I think they jumped the gun on this one, likely assuming that modern audiences would want a standard HUD reticle, but I don't see why both couldn't have been available as a settings toggle. Other than that, I don't know what more I could possibly want from this. The verdict for Resident Evil 4 Remake is a 10 out of 10, the first I've ever given. It's the benchmark for a remake, including everything that was loved and remembered from its source material, yet having its own voice and playing like a new game. It's more than just an outstanding remake of a classic, though. It's a breath of fresh air in a segment that I didn't realize was so stagnant. My experience with this game will probably make me far more critical of its more compromised peers. It felt so right in the moment that I didn't even process how unique it is until after the fact. We do not get many, if any, games like this anymore at this level of technical prowess. Seeing the impact previous RE Engine titles had on the horror genre, I can only hope that others will take this game's success as a signal that audiences are still receptive to gameplay-first action game design.